Hi, Gero 200.
It's both of us.
It's the two of us. You
Yeah,
get two for one this week.
awesome.
I usually ask John if I can help out with this lecture because these are topics I'm very passionate about. So you're probably thinking that's weird. That's okay.
Yeah,
We're
and then,
talking about cancer, death, and dying, and I love it. So let's get into
we'll
it.
get into
Also,
it.
before we go in, just a reminder that your CT1 is due. Is it this Wednesday?
Yes, this Wednesday.
Sweet mother of
All
God,
right.
the semester's
And
going fast.
yeah, I'll click on it and just to remind you, everything you need is right there. Okay, so here's the description exactly laid out how you to do what you're supposed to do. These are the two links that you go to get your graphs. Okay, and we have a slide deck, as you can see right there. If you prefer that, I have a YouTube video that explains everything. Um, this gives you the
Developing countries.
developing countries that you're supposed to look for, just one, and then there's your rubric, okay, and there's the kind of figures you're going to generate. So it's pretty awesome. So it's a great assignment. You're going to have fun with it, okay?
Yeah. And if you have any questions, you can contact me. I'll be trying to watch my email, and I think I've sent you my cell phone number, and I'll send another email out just reminding you these are the high points. This is how to do well on the assignment.
Okay, cool. So we just clicked into the weekly assignments, and so we gave you a little bit of primer of some of the risk factors from aging right in here, the biology of aging for diseases like cancer and diabetes. And so we're launching right into cancer. All right, so the video is going to go right here, okay? And I'm going to let Julie do this, okay?
Okay.
Awesome.
So, why am I so passionate about cancer? Because I am a cancer patient and I come from a family where a lot of people have had cancer. My dad has had first kidney cancer, beat that, bladder cancer, beat that. Now he has lung cancer. He's a smoker, he's obese. So, we'll talk about how those factors might contribute to a risk for cancer. His sisters both had breast, one had ovarian, one had melanoma. So it's very common in my family to not just have cancer once, but to have it more than once. So I was diagnosed 10 years ago with leukemia, and I have done really well and participated in a clinical trial for treatment. And what I have seen in the last 10 years in terms of the development of new treatments and the progress in terms of the research is very encouraging and very exciting.
Cool thing about
So,
doing a clinical trial is you get the most recent advances in medicine. For example, we had a clinical trial that gave us they resulted in a vaccination for SARS-CoV-2, right? So,
absolutely.
it's just really modern approaches, and
Yeah,
that's
and I actually participated in a clinical trial, a study with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society looking at a blood cancer patient response to COVID
yeah,
vaccines, which
exactly.
helped really guide some of the information that's being disseminated right now to cancer
She's been
patients.
in multiple
And
trials,
yeah, yeah, I
three
love it. I
trials.
have
Actually,
probably five.
yeah,
There's
yeah.
a lot of studies where they say, can we have blood? And I say, yes,
The
take as
most
many tubes of
important
blood
trial,
as you want.
though, was she was a guinea pig for a treatment that had never been done before. So so people are heroes that do that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Okay.
So a lot of what we're doing this week, we want you to become familiar with the public health statistics about cancer and just understanding how this data is presented and understanding the different types of cancer that might happen and what the trends are with these different types of cancer, how you can prevent cancer or reduce your risk of cancer, where our problems are in terms of cancer treatment. So I'm going to go up a little tiny
All right,
bit.
cool.
Okay,
And while we're doing this too, I just want to remind you, if some people just added the class, um, you know, an approach, it may not be the best approach, but an approach to do this is open the browser twice, or have two separate browsers, and you will come down here and you'll open your quiz. All right, so you see we have all this information that you can use to answer your quiz. And so this is a big section, as you can see. So you open the quiz right here, and then you have a second browser where, as
you have the Blackboard side up.
yeah, where you're looking at your quiz and looking at the information. That way, it makes it a little bit easier to answer the questions. All right, cool.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go back up here too, right there.
Okay, so we're using the 2021 SEER report, which is a report that the federal government puts out every year. The 2022 SEER report is not out yet. I don't know why. Things seem to be happening more slowly during the pandemic. So anyway, this is the most recent data that's been reported by the federal government. And they usually look over a period of time. So when you're doing your quiz questions, you're going to say, okay, some of the data is 2013 to 2017, some of it's 2014 to 2018. So when you see those date ranges, that'll key you where to look. Okay, so what we're seeing is that generally, oh wait, I need to define incidence and mortality first, I almost forgot. When we talk about this data, we talk about cancer incidence, which is the number of newly diagnosed cancers per 100,000 people in the US or worldwide, if we're looking worldwide. Mortality rate is the number of deaths that year per 100,000 people, right?
Right. I know, sorry, I was phasing out. But in the way to remember, incidence is increase. All right.
Yes.
So the IN, okay, means, how many new cases happened this year. That's what the incidence is.
Okay.
And now the prevalence is that if we just take a snapshot, how many people have it at this moment in time. So those are two different readouts that people that do statistical analysis, this is called epidemiology, that's what they do.
Yeah, so when we look back at cancer data, we're looking at what were the treatments that were available then, not what's available today if you get diagnosed today. So the data going backwards is always going to be a little more negative than the data going forwards if you were diagnosed today. So anyway, what we see generally right now is that the overall cancer death rates are going down for both men and women. But it's really important to also look at the different individual types of cancer, because we see that some cancer might be increasing, some cancer deaths might be decreasing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, good news for lung cancer and melanoma patients. We have new treatments. We have better policies regarding screening. So if you have a family member who's a lifelong smoker, they may be eligible to get annual CT scans to find tumors early. And my dad, because he has lung cancer, I've been kind of studying up on it. We also have something new that's called a liquid biopsy, where they take your blood and they look at little pieces of DNA that are look for little pieces of DNA that are shed by tumors. So that's something that could be a potential screening technique in the future that might be easier. You just get your blood drawn in the doctor's office instead of having to go to an imaging center to get a CT scan. So lung cancer and melanoma, death rates are going down because of checkpoint inhibitors, new drugs, better screening, earlier diagnosis, things like that. Cancer death rates for children and young adults, you'll see AYA, adolescents, young adults, are also declining in recent years. And one of the reasons for that is that when children get cancer, their parents are much more likely to sign them up for a clinical trial than an adult cancer patient. So we have a very high clinical trial participation rate among children. And they tend to go to major academic medical centers that maybe provide better care.
And it's the participation is disproportionate too in terms of socioeconomic status.
Absolutely. So
just backtracking on the stats, when we look at all these percentages, and Julie was talking about her family, do realize that the shock and awe stat that is always used is that 1 out of every 2 men and 1 out of every 3 women get cancer in their lifetime. So
absolutely, tends to be a disease of older people.
Right. You accumulate mutations.
Yes, tends to be a disease of older people. So let's go down. What can you do to prevent cancer? It's actually shockingly easy. Don't smoke cigarettes. They're very bad. That includes, I believe, vaping. You should exercise regularly. You should try to be a healthy weight. You should eat healthy. Try to drink responsibly. And that's limit your sun exposure. So these are all the kinds of things that can cause mutations or changes in your body that can create cancer. Right now, I would say about 40% of the cancer cases in the US are related to obesity, bad diet, and our bad lifestyle that we have in the US.
So that's environmental. So these are kind of choice, matters. So that's a big stat that is modifiable risk, meaning that you can, change your lifestyle and reduce your risk.
Now, I know during the pandemic, a lot of us were gaining weight and drinking too much. Don't panic if you've had a less than healthy lifestyle over the last few years, because this is really something that happens over your life, over decades.
It's the long haul.
It's a long haul. So try to be healthy going forward. Smoking, what a lot of people don't know is smoking doesn't just cause lung cancer. My dad's living proof of that. Sorry. Wait, go down. Smoking causes liver, bladder, kidney, cervical, and this chart shows the proportion of cancer cases and deaths attributable to cigarette smoking. Lung is the biggest. And then, of course, all the things that are involved in your larynx, your esophagus, your oral cavity. So
direct exposure. And you can see the down at the bottom of the scale.
But I think what's really interesting for him as a man who's had cancer 3 times, who has been a very heavy lifelong smoker, first he got kidney cancer, then he got bladder cancer, now he has lung cancer. So all of those little chemicals that come in through smoking will impact you throughout your body. Okay, the link between cigarette smoking and lung cancer deaths is very, very significant. This is a chart that shows cigarette sales tracking lung cancer deaths almost exactly. And then you start to see cigarette sales go down in the US because we started to increase taxes on cigarettes. We started to do a lot of public health education about the link between smoking. We started to, no more smoking on planes, no more smoking in public buildings, no more smoking in restaurants. And so we've taken all these public health steps to decrease to make it hard for people to smoke and to decrease secondhand smoke. So we're seeing all these changes that decrease sales and also decrease deaths from
You can see the impact
cancer.
of public health over time. So
Yeah.
and so now we're trying to do the same thing now with diet and obesity and exercise, like Julie said. So once it becomes part of our culture, then hopefully we'll see the same kind of trends.
Okay, physical activity. Now, when you're in college, you're probably still more physically active than you will be once you get out and you start working full time. And the next thing you know, you're working crazy hours and you get married and you have kids and life gets complicated. But regular physical exercise is very, very effective at reducing the risk of a lot of different cancers. So for men and women, colorectal cancer for women, endometrial cancer, breast cancer. And there's even some indication that a healthy diet and regular exercise, if you've been diagnosed with breast cancer, will decrease the risk that your breast cancer will recur. And so I'm watching that data very closely because I think for a lot of cancer patients, the first question that comes to mind is, what can I do? What control do I have over what's happening to my body? And the idea that by eating healthy and exercising regularly, you can reduce your risk of recurrence is really cool.
When we looked at the theory of aging last time, they talked a lot about free radical damage and mitochondrial dysfunction. That was one section. And so exercise and a good diet is a great way of reducing this oxidative damage that causes mutation. So that's, there's a true science kind of link to all of that.
Yeah. The bad news is that alcohol use contributes to quite a few cancers, colon cancer, very much so, rectal cancer, breast cancer. None of these are cancers that we really have on our top list of, cancers we want to get. And so that's something to think about. Obviously, if you're in college and you're binge drinking on the weekend, that alone probably won't put you over the edge. But if you continue to do that for a number of years, then that could create a problem. So I always tell people, look at your whole risk profile. If you're drinking, then try to exercise more, try to eat healthier, try to counterbalance your risk overall in your lifestyle. And then hopefully if you're engaging in some risky behaviors, but not other risky behaviors, don't smoke and drink, etc., then you can control your risk. Okay, so now we're getting into the data and how it's presented. And the red lines mean you've seen an increase in rates of new cancer cases or deaths. The blue lines show a decrease. And so this is broken down by men and women, and you can see that men are showing an increase in melanoma rates of new cancer cases. Women are showing an increase in liver. and also melanoma. So that's sun exposure. You know, we don't see as many people that do tanning beds anymore. But, you know, when you live in California, you're outside a lot, you're doing stuff outside. You know, try to be a little more mindful about wearing a hat, wearing sunscreen, just taking you know, basic steps
And if you
to
look at,
control.
again, the epidemiology, so are these modifiable risk factors? The other thing that Julie mentioned is, this is a long haul, and these cancers are age related, and short of the shortening of the lifespan that happened with COVID, people are living longer, and if you live longer, then your likelihood of showing a cancer is going to increase as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're seeing decreases in a lot of cancers. So that's really good news for both men and women. So we're seeing decreases in non-Hodgkin lymphoma, thyroid cancer, colorectal cancer. That's all good news. So this report, like I said, it comes out every year and it's a look back. This is for 2013 to 2017 data to just see what happened with the cancer rates. Okay, now, when we look at deaths, of course, women and men have different body parts. So women are seeing an increase in uterine cancer. Well, we don't see that on the male side. We see oral cavity and pharyngeal cancer increasing and bone and joint cancer among men. And so that's another thing that our public health people stare at this data and say, okay, why are these types of cancer deaths increasing? What are we doing wrong? And so when we look at women, we're seeing an increase in death rates from uterus and liver cancer. Whoops, so get that down. Likely related to alcohol use and obesity. Men are seeing increase in deaths related to bone joint cancer, oral cavity cancer, soft tissue cancer, brain cancer. Because men are smoking less, they actually think that a lot of the oral cavity cancers are related to HPV, and liver cancer risk factors are alcohol use, obesity, hepatitis C infection, and diabetes. So healthy diet, control your risk. You know, Hep C is typically, IV drug use. It can be sexually transmitted. There are, I think, treatments available now. Control your weight, drink responsibly. And so men and women are both seeing the biggest decreases for melanoma and lung cancer because of better screening and early detection and much better treatments that we're getting through new drugs. So kind of fun.
And that's great. I mean, those statistics right there are dramatic in terms of the death rates.
And those were two cancers, particularly lung cancer. My aunt was diagnosed with lung cancer about 15 years ago, and she lasted about 2 months. Whereas in today's world, with these new checkpoint inhibitors and personalized treatment, where we go in, we get a liquid biopsy or an actual tissue biopsy, we analyze your cancer to see what type of mutations it has, and then we use targeted drugs that are going after the specific mutations that your tumor has, and that has increased survival quite a bit.
In the old days, it was chemotherapy, radiation, and now there's new scientific approaches, which is awesome.
Okay, so when you look at cancer incidence rates, it's going to be affected by access to medical care. Are people getting screened frequently? So you might be detecting more cancer. That doesn't mean that more people necessarily had cancer, but that we're finding it. We're finding it early. We may be finding it before the cancer can develop. Like when you have a colonoscopy, the doctor goes in and he cuts out all of your polyps because those are precancerous changes in your gut. So making sure that you get these preventative screenings is really important. And it's one explanation for why white males have the highest incidence rate of cancer, because they have better access to health insurance, health care, preventative screening, things like that. And they may have decreased their risk from occupational exposure and smoking. Now, I am very concerned right now because when I look at the COVID pandemic, a lot of older people who are at higher risk of cancer didn't get their colonoscopies. Women weren't getting their mammograms. Men weren't going in and getting their prostates checked. And so this failure to get checked over a couple of years down the road is going to translate into later diagnosis, more difficult to treat cancers, and ultimately an increase in deaths. So we're going to see that down here. Estimated cumulative excess deaths, that means more deaths than should have happened from colorectal and breast cancers due to the COVID pandemic. Looking forward about 10 years from the beginning of the pandemic to 2030, the dark blue line is colorectal, the light blue line is breast, and we're seeing that we may have as many as 5,000, 4,000 to 5,000 deaths every year. It's a lot of people to lose to cancer that's unnecessarily happening. So if you have any relatives that are, say, over 45, call them up and say, have you had your colonoscopy? Have you had your mammogram? Have you been to the doctor for a checkup lately? Don't wait. Get it done.
And that's early detection from screening. That's all that is right there.
Yes. Okay. So now we're going to look at incidence and death rates broken down by race, ethnicity, and sex. So when we look at that, we see that non-Hispanic whites have the highest incidence rate. Asian Pacific Islanders have the lowest incidence rate, and Hispanics have the next lowest incidence rate.
Again, these are the increases that are happening in the period that we're looked at per 100,000.
Per 100,000, so in that time frame. So, but when we look at death rates, we see that non-Hispanic Black patients had the highest death rate. So they didn't have the highest incident rate, they had the highest death rate. So when we see a gap between incidence and death, I start to get worried. What's happening? What can we do to stop this? We still see very encouraging data from non-Hispanic Asian Pacific Islanders and Hispanic patients that they had a lower death rate. So their death rate is matching up with their incidence rate. So that's good. When we look
access to services, and it is what it is. It's socioeconomic.
And we look by sex, we see again non-Hispanic Black males and non-Hispanic. I think non-Hispanic Black males have the highest incidence rate. No, Black. Sorry.
Right here.
Yes. And let's go back up. So
this is combined, and this is males.
So. They have the highest incidence rate. Non-Hispanic white females have the highest incidence rate. And then when we look at death, it's non-Hispanic Black males, non-Hispanic Black females have the highest death rates. So, so we've got to work on that. We've got to work on educating people to make sure that they are getting early screening. We've got to work on making sure that people have access to health care, that people have access to health insurance. We've got to work on developing trust between the patients and the medical establishment, because I know as a woman, I've experienced going into the doctor and having the doctor before I was diagnosed with leukemia, I kept going to the doctor and saying, I'm really tired and I'm sick all the time and I don't really get it because this isn't like me. And the doctors just said, oh, honey,
you're a neurotic woman.
You're just,
that's what happens
you're
to,
just a little
that's
cuckoo.
what happens to women. Women get misdiagnosed as being neurotic. It's a real sexist, medicine's very sexist as well.
So anyway, so when we have a failure by our medical establishment to treat all of their patients equally, it can be very, very discouraging when you're going in and saying, hey, I'm having this symptom, and it doesn't get attended to. So we've got to work on that. We've got to work on developing trust between patients and the medical establishment, and just having a better dialogue with patients. We also need to work on access to clinical trials, because as I can tell you, my clinical trial did great. I'm here because of it. And so we see a much lower participation rate among people of color in clinical trials.
And we had the best insurance money could buy that allowed us to go wherever we wanted.
Yeah,
that was the bottom line.
but there's the time and the cost. I had to travel to San Diego, so I had to spend money on gas. Luckily my job's flexible enough that I could schedule around my job, and my boss was really supportive, so that was all good. And so, but if you're working a crazy hour jobs and you're working an hourly job, or you don't have money for gas, or so we've got to eliminate barriers to treatment for people so that everyone, if they want to be in a clinical trial, it's easy, your transportation's handled, you've got support. So there's a lot of things that we can do to improve these numbers. I'm giving you links. The American Cancer Society has great detailed facts and figures for both African Americans and Hispanics to try to look and see, what's happening in various communities. They say that some of the factors that are influencing these statistics are socioeconomic status and access to care for African Americans, and access to healthy foods. We see in LA that depending on what part of LA you live in, you might be in a food desert. I mean, around USC until Target and Trader Joe's opened, you had to travel a little bit to get to a decent grocery store that had good fruits and vegetables. Access to health insurance. The American Cancer Society says that is also important. But even if you control for all these variables and you look at Black people in the US and white people in the US who have the same private health insurance, Black people in the US still have a lower cancer survival rate. And so that's why I think there's something wrong with our medical establishment and the way that patients are being treated when we see that lower cancer survival rate.
So
We've got to figure that out.
The trial, the last one of the trials that Julie joined is called All of Us, and this is where they were looking to get tissue samples, epidemiology information from a million people, right?
Mm-hmm.
From a million people across our country of all ethnicities and trying to get a nice balance in the sexes, and from that you use big data analysis, computer analysis, and begin to sift it down and hone it down to get answers to these big epidemiology questions.
So if you're interested in participating, this is a trial. It's called NIH All of Us, and you can Google that and go onto the website. When I signed up, I filled out some paperwork. They took a blood sample. They took some measurements, and then I periodically fill out forms. I've given them access to my healthcare records because I'm a cancer patient and I have a bucket load of healthcare records, which is good for them. And so I think it's a really cool study. So anyway, when we look at Hispanic Americans, we see that they have this very low incidence rate and very low death rate. The concern is that the cancer death rates increase for people the longer they are in the US. So if you have a community where there may be some recent immigrants, and then by the second generation, people are starting to drink more, they're starting to eat lousy food, they're not doing the healthy things that they were doing
purposely,
before.
So instead of having to go out there in the fields and work really hard all day to get your really healthy food, you stand all day flipping burgers or something like that.
And we're kind of passionate about this. We teach a class in Costa Rica that when we went down there, and they have an amazing number of people who have lived to be 100 years old. And we were studying the culture and what people do, and they eat just amazing fresh food. They walk everywhere.
They work
really hard.
Physically hard.
They don't smoke, and they have a really great national healthcare system. So a lot of things that benefit the community. So anyway, you can see more information about that. The National Cancer Institute site has, we put a document, I think, right there, the PDF, that you can read more about different types of cancer. So some of the quiz questions will be drawn from that. We have this animated video, and I made some notes because it's long, but I'm going to cover the high points. So your body is made up of parts called organs. The organs are made up of cells, millions of cells. The cells are made up of little tiny parts called organelles. So if you didn't take high school biology, that's pretty much what you need to know. The most important part of the cell is the nucleus, because the nucleus has your chromosomes that are made up of genes, and the genes are made up of DNA. So when you get cancer, it's because a single part of your DNA typically mutated, which affected the expression of a gene, which typically affected the growth of the cell or the ability of the cell to be reined in and killed if the cell is damaged and isn't doing well.
Your DNA is like a cookbook, okay? You follow the recipe and you make the food, right? So you follow the recipe that is in the DNA, the genes, and you make proteins, and these proteins serve all these different purposes, okay? The rate of growth, the rate of eliminating bad cells, okay? And if somebody goes in there and edits the cookbook, the food you're going to make is going to be really bad, and that's what happens with mutations in the DNA. It gets edited, it gets mutated, and now the proteins make your cells grow too fast, and you can't get rid of the bad debris, and that's
so
bad.
Your normal cells get a signal that tells them to divide, and they say, okay, we will divide now. Cancer cells don't wait for that signal; they just divide. And normal cells get a signal that says, okay, stop dividing. We're done. We have enough cells. We don't want to have too many cells. And they will stop dividing. Cancer cells won't stop dividing. That's how you get the tumors that get bigger and bigger and bigger. So cancer cells just don't follow the rules.
And I'm going to backtrack to last week's biology of aging chapter. And so there was this link to Julia has been talking a lot about lifestyle and obesity. Okay. And when you have too much nutrition and you develop lots of fat in your viscera, that becomes kind of a release and go signal. Remember, they talked about this insulin like growth factor hormone, okay, as well as insulin, and both of those hormones drive cells to divide much more quickly, and then the ability to go in there and repair the problems gets diminished. And so you have these two different trajectories that Julie's going to talk about then that are permissive for cancer.
Okay, so what causes these mutations in your DNA? Chemical exposure like cigarette smoke or chemicals in the workplace, pesticides, things like that. Radiation from being out in the sun, radiation from a tanning bed, radiation from just radiation. If you get 100 x-rays, then at some point you might have some mutations. And sometimes it's just random and we don't know why it happens. So in the video and in this graphic that I put into Blackboard, they talk about proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressor cells. Our dog just ran in the room.
That's a good thing.
She is also a cancer survivor. She had sarcoma almost 3 years ago, and
that's a tough one too.
She's doing well.
Yeah.
So anyway, so you have these cells, these genes called proto-oncogenes, and when they're not mutated,
and I hate that name.
I know. I do.
It's just these are normal genes that tell your cells to grow. So when you get rid of old bad skin cells, you got to tell the stem cells underneath, okay, it's time to make new ones grow.
So they're the gas pedal in the car.
Right.
They're telling the car to go. They're telling you to grow. They're telling the cells to divide. When that proto-oncogene mutates, it becomes an oncogene, and it stops working. So it's like a broken part on your car or a broken part on your laptop or something like that. And now the cells are dividing, too much gas. The tumor suppressor genes are brakes. So you have 2 copies of all of your genes. You get one from your mom, one from your dad. You have 2 copies. So a famous tumor suppressor gene is P53. So if one of them is mutated and not working, it's just like having brakes on the front of your car and the back of your car. You're probably still going to be okay. If both of them get mutated, then you don't have brakes anymore. So now you don't have brakes, your car won't stop, your cancer cells won't stop dividing, and that's, you get piled up more and more cells and you get a big giant tumor.
So P53 is the most common mutation across, if you look at all the cancers, it's seen most often in most of the cancers. There's like over 200 different types of cancer, so it's the most common one, and its job is to go in there and repair the mutation in the DNA, fix that recipe, and then when the mutations are overwhelming, its job is to tell the cell it's time for you to go, and it's a suicide. It's the magic bullet that's supposed to kill the cells. But if the P53 is screwed up, then you don't repair the DNA.
You don't have anything to suppress that tumor.
And then the cell that was supposed to die off won't go away, and it just then keeps passing on mutation to mutation, and the tumor grows.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fun fact, elephants have dozens and dozens and dozens of copies of P53. They don't get cancer because if one mutates, no big deal. I've got like 45 left. So anyway, elephants, we want to be more like elephants. Okay, in the video, it talks about angiogenesis, which tumors tend to like to have blood supply. For 2 reasons. They want to get nutrition, they want to get oxygen, and then they want to send their little pieces out into your body to metastasize and set up a new spot in your body. So that's 90% of people who die from cancer die because their cancer has metastasized and it's gone from the original spot and it's gone through the blood to go somewhere else.
Now, cancer cells, they have a huge appetite for glucose. They take up about 20 times more glucose than the normal cells right next door, and they do that because they're using that glucose to manufacture all the new bits and pieces, the parts, the building blocks. So if you're going to build a house, you need new bricks, you need new nails, you need new frames, and so they take a lot of that glucose just to do that. Okay, so one of the first tests they did on you, it's called a PET scan. Okay, and what it is you infuse radioactive glucose into the veins of the patient, and they put them into a scanner. And if you have a tumor, then because they're taking up 20-fold more glucose than a normal cell, it just lights up like a Christmas tree in your body.
Okay, and you're probably thinking, well, I'll just stop eating sugar and then I'll never get cancer and everything will be fine. That's not quite how it works. No. However, there are clinical trials looking at using diabetes drugs like metformin to see if that can slow or prevent the progression of cancer. So I think we're going to get there.
Also, the new wave drugs, the GLP-1 agonists. Like,
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Like Ozempic, and there's I mean, and there's actually clinical trials doing the ketogenic diet as well. So.
I'm laughing because I got a little bit thick during my cancer treatments, and by a little bit thick I mean like really, 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 really.
It was a side effect of the drugs. It is what it is.
I was also eating my feelings.
That's true.
So anyway, so I'm working on that. I'm working on getting in better shape. So if you see me walking on campus, I'm trying. So anyway, and then we have a special word called apoptosis that normal people don't use, but scientists do. And that means when a cell is damaged, your body naturally says, hey, damaged cell, you need to die. And the cell commits suicide and it dies, which is awesome.
And what protein? Come on, I just told you.
Is it P53?
P53. Okay,
makes the cells die.
It's one of many. Okay,
now,
the BRCA gene for breast cancer is another one of these tumor suppressor genes that will try and repair the DNA, but when the cell is sick, then it's time to go apoptosis. Then the BRC, the BRCA gene, goes crazy, as does P53.
Okay. So when you go into cancer treatment, quite often in modern cancer therapy, you get more than one drug. The clinical trial that I was in was combining two very different drugs. And the reason for that is if we only use one drug to treat the cancer, the cells that are susceptible to that drug will die. And then the cells that are resistant are like, hey, now I have room to grow. And then they grow up and you get a tumor that's harder to kill. So for most of modern cancer therapy, we try a multi-pronged approach. We might try some immuno, and none of the stuff that I had was chemo. I had a targeted therapy, a Bruton tyrosine kinase inhibitor. I had an immunotherapy, an antibody that bound to the cell, and it was great.
Right. So they can, you'll hear this. So if you have a parent friend who goes to see the oncologist, they'll talk about we need to do combinational chemotherapy or combinational targeted drug approaches, and it's because, like Julie said, cancer cells are nefarious, and they figure out ways to become resistant to forms of treatment, and so you'll be doing good, and all of a sudden, dang, if you were close to remission, and then the cancer comes back.
Yeah, so. And the newer, a lot of the newer treatments have very tolerable side effects. I worked full time. I took more naps. I got a little thick, but that's all good. I can live with that. So anyway, enough about me. Okay, so that's everything about cancer. I want to talk about the discussion. We're talking about grief, death, and dying, but grief isn't just about when someone dies, and many of us have had friends and family affected by COVID who've died recently, and so sadly, what I'm seeing among my students is that a lot more of my students have experienced loss in the form of death more recently than in the past.
And the reason we link this to this, we have this discussion linked to the weekly assignment on cancer is, you don't even have to have a loss. You get a diagnosis like cancer and you do this.
You will go through stages of grieving.
And you'll go through all these denial, anger, bargaining, depression, etc. You'll go through all that because it is such a scary diagnosis.
John injured his hamstring recently, and he's been going through stages of grief because he can't do the things he normally does.
I'm pissed off. I have anger. I'm in denial. So what does that mean? I go back out and I surf it, and I go surfing and I injure it again. And now I'm just freaking depressed.
The Saints.
There's no acceptance.
The Saints football team lost today.
Did they really?
Yes, they did, and it was tragic.
The Rams tried to lose today too.
I'm going through the stages of grief, dealing with that loss, which is painful for me. But anyway, the important thing to know there are many, many theories of grief and how grief happens. One theory is this Kubler-Ross stages of grief, which is DABDA, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Now, it's not necessarily linear. When you're grieving, you may go from denial to anger, back to denial again. You may skip anger and go to depression and then hop back to anger. My mom died suddenly a few years ago, and I was in pretty significant stages of grief for probably 2 years. I don't know. We were really close. She was really important to me, and we were not just mother daughter, but best buddies. And so it was a long process, and it's only been recently in the probably in the last year that I have I'm able to take more comfort in her memory and kind of celebrate her life and think about all the things that I loved about her and have less pain. So, but you have, in a weird way, you have to go through it. So
My mom was like Queen Elizabeth. She lasted to 95, and so when she died, I didn't, I was like, I was actually, I felt very, very lucky and blessed, and I went to immediate acceptance. So it was like,
Well, I think when you know that someone's going to die for several years before they do,
mhm,
you have anticipatory grief. You get ready. You are
right.
anticipating the loss of this person. But you can have grief from injuring your hamstring. You can have grief from not getting the job that you wanted to get. You can have grief from getting a bad grade on a test or having a relationship end.
No, not a bad boyfriend, girlfriend.
You can have grief from maybe you have a friend who's struggling with drugs or alcohol or mental health issues, and they're physically still there, but your relationship isn't maybe doing so well. And so you're grieving the loss of that intimacy and the loss of that relationship that you've had with this person. So you could have a lot of different types of grief, and they're all, I guess what I'm trying to say is be respectful of your feelings, be kind to yourself, allow yourself to experience loss, allow yourself to kind of go through these stages of grief and understand that the more you care, the more you love, the deeper you're going to feel loss when you
Yeah.
have it.
They're all valid. Don't beat yourself up.
And different people do
Yeah.
grieve differently. So you might have a friend that their way of grieving is to, go play basketball. That's okay. And maybe your way of grieving is to, eat cookies. That's okay too.
I'm I'm sad because I eat, and I eat because I'm sad. Right?
He stole my line. But anyway, so if you're going through grief, this discussion and you don't feel comfortable talking about death in this discussion, you can, if you're comfortable sending me your response directly, you can do that.
You
But
can talk about the Saints loss today if
yes,
you want, whatever it is. You can talk about like you said, having a bad boyfriend, girlfriend, or you can just do
and for
something
a lot of people, the
altogether
first
different.
loss they experience is a pet. And we have a dog that's almost 14, and she's been having some health issues recently. And I'm kind of going through that process of like, okay, here we go. Sometime in the next year or so, we're going to lose her, and my heart breaks already just thinking about it. But
But the best way to get over that pet is like the same way you get over a bad girlfriend. You just get a new one.
yeah. I
There
mean,
you go.
it's never going to be the same, though. Never.
True.
But anyway, so I think that's all I have to say.
All right, cool. Isn't it great having Julie on board? So she's the expert in this stuff, and we're a team. Please, don't hesitate to contact us. We put out our emails and our cell phone numbers. Everything's in the syllabus. If you have any issues, and yeah, so enjoy the rest of your weekend. Peace, and congratulations on week 5. Goodbye.